Where's the blame? You know what it is, as I see it? It's greed. We seem to be losing our way to a certain extent in America. And it's not about the politics. I know everybody says politics and terrorism, the troubling economy. We've lost our way. And we've lost our way because we seem to be losing the one thing that always made our country great: ethics, morals, principles, and integrity. Needed, maybe more now than ever.
But unfortunately, evil is real, Ed. It walks the earth, and this man was evil. Doctor, you're right. I mean, evil is very real, yet a lot of folks after the shooting are quick to point fingers at President Trump and say, you know, it's an environment of hate that has led to this. The only thing that is evil in this instance is the man who perpetrated this massacre and the anti-Semitism that he was propagating. I'll tell you what's evil. It's people who exploit tragedy for their own purposes, and also the man who perpetrated this crime.
Doctor, when you call someone evil,
posturing.
Yeah, this is important as well in the United States, especially when it comes to or in light of some of the stories that we were just covering, for example. So here's the question that we pose about the way things were as opposed to the way things are now. Why aren't many of the stories that you need to know about being covered? Or when they are, why is it that they're often not covered in full?
His arrest comes after 4 more packages of improvised explosive devices that were discovered just today. A total of 14 explosive devices in all put in the mail to Americans who've criticized President Trump or have been the constant subject of the president's anger.
It should come as no surprise that a new Associated Press NORC Center for Public Affairs research poll found that a majority of Americans say the United States is divided. The survey found that 8 in 10 Americans think the country is greatly divided about important values.
This is not who we are in America. We do not harm our political opponents. We beat them with ideas, not with our fists. This should not be a partisan issue. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or a Republican. Violence towards the other side is wrong. Period.
So what brought us to this point in the United States? Why are we so divided as a nation?
It's come to the point where people are so strong in their own beliefs, they just view things with that certain lens of bias, where someone is more favorable towards their particular candidate regardless of reason. So, my prescription for getting through this would be, you have to listen to someone, and then you have to fight with your ideas and explain yourself. And there's very few sort of political people these days that really do that. It's more just throw the cheap shot, duck, and then move on. So I think that this is just the way it is for now.
I agree that I think both sides have to first seek to understand and then seek to be understood by the other side. But unfortunately, a lot of Americans are simply reiterating what they hear on television.
Over the last 30 years, media ownership has become increasingly more concentrated, to the point where in 2018, a handful of companies own the overwhelming majority of the media. This is vastly different from the landscape in the early 1980s, when 90% of the media Americans consumed came from around 50 companies. But in 2018, the ownership of the majority of the media in the U.S. has been reduced to just 6 companies.
It's just giving too much power to one company, a power that no one company should be able to exercise in a democracy like ours.
But as we know, with more control comes higher revenues, and the profits made by these companies are way up. By how much, you ask? Well, for example, Comcast made more than $84 billion in 2017, and its holdings include NBC, MSNBC, Telemundo, Universal Pictures, and DreamWorks Animation. Disney made more than $55 billion last year from holdings that include ABC, ESPN, Marvel Entertainment, Walt Disney Pictures, and Pixar Animation. AT&T made more than $31 billion last year from holdings that include CNN, HBO, TBS, The CW, and Warner Bros. Pictures. Then there is 21st Century Fox, which made more than $28 billion in 2017 and boasts holdings that include Fox News Channel, Fox Business Network, Fox Sports, FX, and National Geographic. CBS made nearly $14 billion last year from holdings that were comprised of the CBS television network, Showtime, Simon & Schuster, and various other TV stations and radio stations. And rounding out the list, Viacom made more than $13 billion in 2017 with holdings that include MTV, Nickelodeon, Comedy Central, BET, and Paramount Pictures. Yet even though the corporate media continues to make massive profits, they still don't have the public's trust. And statistics have shown that in recent years, only a small percentage of Americans have said they have even a fair amount of trust in the media.
Back then, it seemed like the United States could hardly become more divided. Now, many believe it has.
I'm angry about the anger that is dividing this country.
The misleading statements.
The technology is run by people, and people are tribal, and people are greedy, and that's what's going to drive even their business model. I mean, as they start to compete with these 5 giants that we're talking about, so now there might be 10 giants, and we're just little ants crawling around on the ground.
Is it impossible? You know, Rachel, your report was fantastic, and I was watching the numbers as you were adding them all up for us, and they're just astronomical.
Oh, yeah.
And listen, I respect the free market. You know, I think it works. I think, you know, a combination of a free market with some government regulation as control is the right secret sauce. But when you're making $20 billion, can you even have any sense of fairness or of coverage?
Supposedly, because basically, Rick, I mean, you have the First Amendment protecting you. Your converse obligation is to the public to be fair. You don't have to be balanced. You can have a point of view.
But theirs is to the shareholders, isn't it?
Well, yeah, theirs is to the shareholders, and then so theirs are to the institutional shareholders, and they aren't people like you and me, you know, and our intrepid reporter here. They're not grandmothers, Rick. They're other giant corporations.
Can Rachel walk into that boardroom of Time Warner or
no.
You know,
or AT&T?
And say, wait a minute, that story's important.
No, they can't. No, and so news gets commodified as just another product. But in the end, it's all money.
Former Atlanta Fire Chief Kelvin Cochran scores big in his lawsuit against the city. The former Atlanta Fire Chief, who was fired by Mayor Kasim Reed years ago, will receive $1.2 million.
This is quite something to me that there's not more of an uproar about this, that this guy, outside of his capacity in government, outside of his role as fire chief, published a book because he wrote about his Christian beliefs. They told him he wasn't qualified to work for the government anymore to protect his community. That's insane.
It wasn't him criticizing anyone. It was just like, well, yeah, the scripture says they oppose this type of behavior. That should have been innocuous. If you had a public employee writing about the Jewish faith, the Muslim faith, or even some atheistic morality that popped up last Thursday, the government needs to stay out of it. He was not doing this on work time. He was sharing his personal views, and he's sharing a view as well that's shared most likely by the great number of people living in Atlanta. I think it's also telling, too, that the press didn't want to touch this when it was going on because he's an African American. He's a wildly successful African-American leader in his community, and they punished him for his faith. I'm sure a lot of people in Atlanta are very happy to see this turn of events, that the city of Atlanta is paying for their crime.
This is what scares me about the left, though. We talk about the war on Christianity often on this show. Liberals, as you know, claim that there is no such thing as the war on Christianity. That's something that we on the right have invented. This is evidence. We did not invent this. The left actually wants to say, if you openly practice and openly speak about your religion outside of the confines of your home or out of the perimeter of the church parking lot, then you are not qualified to be part of our government. That only if you are actively anti-religion can you take part in our government. That's the part that terrifies me.
Good morning, Michael. The details from police are chilling. These girls in just 6th and 7th grade.
The girls told investigators it was all part of a ritual meant to honor Satan.
This morning, police say 2 girls, just 11 and 12 years old, brought these knives and this pizza cutter to school.
Plan to use to kill their classmates and then eat their flesh.
And police also tell us that the girls admitted to being devil worshippers.
According to investigators, the plan was hatched while watching scary movies during a sleepover. Police also say their investigation revealed disturbing communication between the girls.
Messages appear to show the girls planned the murders and even to kill themselves when it was done.
They did make comments that they were willing to drink blood and may possibly eat flesh.
The pair, being held on several charges, allegedly told police they were Satan worshippers. One of their last texts to each other reading, "We shouldn't have met each other, LOL. Now death is near." The chief of police telling ABC News the girls didn't seem worried as they were questioned by investigators.
There was essentially no reaction from either of these 2 girls. I would describe them as carefree and nonchalant about the process.
How did 2 young kids get to the point where they're plotting to kill and claiming to worship Satan?
Graveyard soil, coffin nails, and some revenge oil. That's what a coven of witches in New York used to place a hex on U.S. Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh this past weekend. He was recently appointed to the lifetime position after facing sexual misconduct allegations. Well, the event was met with protesters condemning the sorcery, while a Catholic priest and exorcist attempted to counter the dark magic by saying a mass.
Brooklyn, where a group of pagan witches have gathered to place a hex on the newly confirmed Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh. Now, in the statement for the event, essentially they said that black magic is a mechanism for exacting justice by women who have been wronged by men just like him. Now, the ceremony is taking place at this occult bookstore behind me. Now, here in liberal Brooklyn, witchcraft, Wicca might just be considered to be another hobby or fascination. But in some parts of the country, it's no laughing matter.
I encourage everyone to also go out and register to vote. Magic is one thing, but the polls are another.
Or is this all just a bunch of silly superstition that means absolutely nothing? Well, like with most spiritual matters, there's no way to be absolutely sure. But what we can be sure of is that Americans are increasingly becoming divided.